Hey.
Hey everybody, welcome back to our Tuesday live session. So this is our second last one. We are getting back to classes outdoors here in Ireland starting on the 27th. So while we can, we get 2 more sessions in. And I think based on what we've seen, Adrian, on our social media, this one looks like a juicy topic for a lot of people.
Yeah, so some of the good reasons, some of the not so good reasons. But yeah, that's it. As long as people are engaging with it, it's great.
Exactly. So we put this out yesterday looking for some suggestions on our YouTube community page. So I put it out as like some suggestions of what to get in for the last 2 sessions. And there was a couple of people came back with some ideas and we jumbled them all together to make a bit of a mash of 360s, double dolios and things like that to come up with what can we learn from WT. So I think that might be a great place to start for people who are tuned in. Let us know what side of the fence you're on, what background you're coming from. Is it from the WT side, ITF? Just pop it into the chat box there. Let us know which side you're representing. And I think it's going to be a good discussion as well. And hopefully people can get involved in the chat and give their suggestions on things they've noticed that help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the first thing is, in terms of where this came from, the suggestions that we got were very much around specific techniques. And as I was looking at the specific techniques, it was like, well, all of these things were things that were taken over probably in the 80s and 90s, particularly the 80s, from WTF as it was at the time. And they were kind of borrowed and utilized by some of the top competitors at the time. And they changed the format, so everyone had to kind of then react to those techniques being in the game and, and move from there. And I mean, this is a natural process that happens over time. Things can be so old-fashioned that they're back in fashion again is the way that it works. And again, it's just the game reacting and evolving depending on what the challenges in place are. And you can always go and find a technique somewhere or a way of competing that lets you maximize your strengths and deal with what's there. Because the last thing you want to do as a competitor is acknowledge that, look, someone else is doing something that's good and I don't have an answer for that. I can't do what they're doing as well as them. So, well, I better find something else to do. And, if you go back to the 80s, particularly coming out of the Netherlands and Canada, so there was a few competitors who were doing a phenomenal job implementing a couple of the techniques that were common in WTF at the time, or WT, and really figuring out how to make it work in our ITF. So yeah, we just thought we'd have a look at some of those and talk about maybe how they were used and maybe whether or not they still have validity, or who uses them, how they use them now. And we'll just kind of follow a format. We'll look at the kind of the entries, we'll look at particular shots, we'll look at some counters and some ideas or thinking maybe that's come across from WT.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen that as well in recent times with a bit of wacko across in the modern ITF game. So I think it's good. Like, if everybody can bring bits and pieces, it just adds a little bit of variety, a little bit of art to it all. And then you get some creative styles, unique styles, and then people can kind of take what they want from it, I guess, and create their own little recipe, which is all good for what we're trying to do and make things more appealing to eyes and things like that. So yeah, maybe we'll get into the first one, Adrian. And do you want me to start with some entries maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to have a look at the kind of the crossover, that backhand punch that, again, you run ahead and introduce that one there anyway, and then I'll queue up the next one from there.
Yeah, so this one is actually one that we got, we covered a lot with Neil Ernest, for anybody who's seen his highlight video and the breakdown that we did on some of his best bits. Obviously, Neil is coming through that era maybe of the 90s as well, where a lot of the WT stuff was highly influenced with changing stances and things like that. But one of the features of his game was using that backhand to the body as an entry. Now, that's not really something that we see too often in the modern day, but as an entry coming in here to this, it gives you a lot of opening to be able to come in. But how do you get there is the thing. So in the WT guys, you'll see that they'll be bouncing, and then the minute somebody lifts their toe to make a forward motion, whether it's a kick or advancement on a step or whatever, they'll just come right through into it, and just no matter what happens, their mind is almost made up. So it's a nice little one. Then when we used in ITF, there's a little bit of an adjustment, obviously. So you're looking at using your front leg to come in. So we covered this in some recent videos as well, but it's just using your front leg to come in and just close down that space, which is what we're looking at, and then using it to the body. But in terms of an entry, it's great to get you into contact, but then You can't leave it as a single shot. What comes next is the question. So as you make into contact here, now we're very, very close, and how you exit from this contact is what is important. In ITF, I think it's important that we don't want to come extremely close, because when you think about WT, they have the body armor, and once there's contact made, that's registered as a score, provided that it's a decent amount of contact and a good clean shot. Whereas in ITF, it's more of a visual score, and it's from the judges in the four corners. So by you committing to that space and really coming into that space, if you commit into it and make it too short, it's very, very difficult for the referees to see it, especially to the body. So I think it might be a good idea for us if we adapted it by maybe starting the technique a little bit early. And this is something that we see in ITF patterns, where people almost start their backward motion very early, and then they get there late, and it's kind of like something that people use as well. So it's the same kind of a principle, that you want to start the technique to open it out as you get in. And then one of the things that really opens up from there, Adrian, is the 45 and different ways of getting it. And you see it from like, is it fair to say that you can actually hold the Hogu traditionally in WT? Maybe some people in the comments there as well who might have a background may help us out with that one. But you can see there's almost a bit of a clinch.
Holding the actual Hogu, no. But the thing is, the arms could go under. You could almost have that underhook position.
So you get the double underhooks.
Yeah, effectively. Like you could definitely end up with that, and a fair bit of manipulation and body bumping, and you could have hands on. Where for us that's pushing, but they could have hands on. So there was definitely much more bumping and a little bit of like shoulder bumping and that kind of thing that would go on for sure.
Yeah, because you would, a lot of time you'd see this entry here, one, and then there's a clinch up, which we obviously can't do in ITF right now because that's considered a foul. And then you can just see the little short little exits like that. It's not the most beautiful looking thing in the world, but when these guys do it with good speed, it's very effective score. And again, it's all about hitting that body armor, as opposed to, for us, it's more of a visual score for the referees. So I think that's a nice way to kind of lead on then to that 45 a little bit,
sure.
As an entry at least.
Yeah, so the basic concept of the 45, like traditionally in ITF, all of our turning kicks would have come around in a full circle. And, you know, even if I'm just kicking here towards the front of Bob, there would have been more of a turn in this kind of fashion to get this shot on the target. And what changed with the WT was just making the shot a little bit more linear and a little bit more efficient. So bringing it through almost like the front kick and then just angling onto the body at the last moment. But then it allows a couple of things. So because it was a quicker shot, the back leg could be used a little bit more, and it could kind of come in as that direct, you know, engagement shot that would bring you to hands. So if you could find with your movement a range where you felt you could beat the front leg, or particularly as things evolved in the late 90s towards the 2000s, and there was a little bit more lateral movement in ITF and the jumping punches were in there, all of a sudden the side kick was less of a threat. So people had left their side fencing style to some degree. They'd opened up a little bit more. The side kick was less prominent, or it was less denial based. So in other words, when they lifted up the leg, it wasn't so much, you know, the body is turned back and everything hidden behind it. It was just, you know, a half side kick for a little while for a lot of competitors. But then this back leg 45 could come in, where you could go from movement a longer range and sneak it in from that long distance, or have that prep step up and you're into hands quite quickly. And even if there was a contact or a clash on the way in, doesn't matter, because we're continuing. We could get to hands and we could get into that shot. And that was the whole goal. Secondly, then, in terms of that, I suppose that 45, the concept was, you know, that was being stolen. It was all about that linear efficiency. It was taking more of a straight line shot, no matter what the distance was. Even if I'm tall, it was taking a straight line shot and just clipping the belt, coming just over the belt to make your contact. So there was no need to fully turn the body in and get the instep. And what that meant as well was, when you started to introduce that shot, instead of being here and then landing and only having the front hand, you know, you're often landing, you know, in a position where it's one and you could bring the backhand in directly. So it kind of gave a little bit of a different leverage, you know, and we saw Neil as well with those shots, not as the entry, but from here, boom, 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 that you could continue by changing the range on it and kicking, you know, with an upright posture, just clipping over the belt and under the ribs. So for me, the introduction of the 45 was like, I think for me, I got it later than most. Like it took a little while to filter through. So we only started really working that in the mid 90s, I'd say, mid to late 90s.
The shorter one is a little bit more unnatural as well, isn't it, Adrian, compared to the long version where you're coming in. You can kind of like explode into it, kind of like what you just showed us. Whereas when you're in the closer version, it's a bit unnatural for the body. It's that you feel almost like squashed and it's like hard to get it off. But I think the one that you just showed, yeah, definitely. I think the one that you just showed, actually, one of the people who was a great example of that to get the hands was Hong. And we see him coming off the back leg a lot to set up his hands. And also he liked to come off his hands on the other side as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was just...
It could change the leg for you.
Take an explosive shot, yes, exactly. And that leads into some of the other shots that because you borrowed that first one, you can slot in a couple of the other things like the dweet, like the... and the modifications to the traditional ITF shots that we're going to talk about as we go on. So, like, while you've got in that close, do you want to talk about that crescent kick? And maybe
so maybe we're talking about that as we're getting into contact here, and maybe we've got into contact and we're inside here in this closer range. So what we can actually see now, it's not something that you always see in WTF, but it is an option. And it's coming back, staying in that contact with a crescent kick, maybe an inward one. So you get to this contact, whether it's going to the body or whatever, and then coming over this way. And if you can come right down on top of the head, it's a nice shot as well. Obviously, Adrian has a bob. It's a nicer kind of position compared to a freestanding bag, but you get the idea. It's coming to contact in here, staying nice and close with the hands, and then exit in with that shot as well. And it's a nice visual. It is a nice visual because there's a clear kind of a break with that shot, and you can see that just as it lands on the head, it's very, very visual. And of course, for WT as well, they have their corner referees for headshots. Isn't that right?
Yeah,
it's not electronically scored as far as I know, anyway.
The technology is definitely moving that way. I know there is there's potential to score it electronically, but it's not. I don't think it's done in all the tournaments. It's there in I think the Grand Prix and the higher level ones now.
Yeah, so that inward crescent kick is definitely an option. So it's in the close range, really. Once we get past our entry and into that close hand range, it is an option there to kind of almost come out of there with that inward crescent kick. So let's show that again, just in case the screen lags slightly. So you get the hands in that nice close range, and it's coming usually from the back leg and over into your center line. Sometimes it comes all the way across, and then that may set you up for a spinning technique as well, based on your distance and what happens next, according to your opponent, of course. But it is a nice option, just coming in off that back leg, especially when you're in that close range. If you have the flexibility to come up and around and across, it's a lovely one. And then you can also have that on the back leg as a counter. So maybe if somebody is popping off the front leg, you can kind of almost time their landing and come across. So if you can imagine there's somebody shooting maybe like a front leg side kick in ITF terms, you can almost cut a little bit of an angle here as well, so it can come across this way. And if you can get that, it's a serious shot. So you're kind of trying to time the drop of that front leg. So if they're shooting to the body, for example, and you're just trying to time that as you get a little bit of a sidestep and up and across. It's not one we see very, very often, but extremely nice score if you can get it off. And you're almost guaranteed 4 judges to give you the 3 points there.
And actually, that's something in the history and tradition of WT that kind of, gives you a clue as to why some of these shots leaked over as well. And again, you could take it, look, foundationally, there's a base shot that's in ITF that's like informing the more sport-specific shot later on. But then the rules in WT originally were, like, the corner judges were going to have to score the body contact. So you needed very strong sounding and feeling kicks. So the back kicks, the turning kicks, because the instep makes a loud bang on the hogu. You can feel the contact, you can see the body move. The same with the back kick. Whereas the push side kick and so on, or the checking side kick, didn't score very well early because, it just didn't, it wasn't about making a sensor, or connecting a loop. It was about physically connecting with the person, making the body move, creating a loud sound that the referees could distinguish. But the headshots were different. So the headshots were scored based on contact. So even though the goal, the ultimate goal, you can win by points, but you can win by knockout. The head kicks tended to be lighter, in general. They tend to be, on the extreme end, hitting with the toes, hitting with the instep, While knockouts happen, of course, like most of the time there isn't a knockout, so it tends to be lighter contacts, and so the type of kick changes. And we were able to take that because our goal isn't a knockout either. Like we're looking to get a 3-pointer from the headshot. So when they were finding very efficient little ways to get a headshot in there, that was well worth looking into. And some people, like the early pioneers of that, kind of took the little bits that they were training and farmed that out and went away. And again, you go back to when all this happened, there was people who were very close friends when ITF and WT split, and when WTF was formed. And, just because they were in different organizations didn't mean they stopped talking, communicating, or even competing together. So that's where some of the cross-pollination started. But we might just have a look then at the short ones, the short 45s. So that idea, again, of being in that close contact where you can just, without shifting the body back maybe from here, you can just let the hips sink and you can quickly and short, find that line just above the hip. And the biggest thing for us when we're in punching range, the hip is generally exposed. So, and the thing that changes as well is you've gone from being traditionally maybe here to the second hands get involved. The hips have to come a bit more square. The shoulders have to come a bit more square to enable the punching. And once that happens, I can be here with Bob, and then the opportunity comes here on this side, it comes here on this side, and I can keep going. So if I can develop the proper rhythm with the shots here, I can keep those legs going and I can kind of follow my partner. And it brings up that concept of the double, where we can't enter with a double in the way that WT could and go back to front, because WT you can hit here, but we can't. So once, like, you'd have to be hitting on this side and it doesn't really work that way. But once we engage with hands, or the other person is trying to engage with hands, well, we can take it in two ways. We can take it as an attacking shot, where if we get here and we're driving them back straight, we can have this and come back in again. So once we've engaged with hands, it's an option. And then if you go back to the time when this was coming in first, you weren't dealing with a blitz. So the hands coming at you typically weren't, a fully committed shot in that way. It was typically a rush, so the legs were carrying forward. So you could give ground and take your bump bump on the way back, particularly if you were keeping the center of gravity low. You could take those shots, and if you had the right length or distance on it, you're potentially getting a couple of 2-pointers before inevitably sitting down, taking a warning, and hopefully only getting maybe one punch in the face for your effort. So there was kind of a trade-off there where you could sneakily pick up a couple of shots. But the preferred one was always if you could get into that contact one, and once the hands were coming there, you had the option to kind of throw a couple of shots as your opponent gained distance from you. So it's like that split rhythm thing again. So if they've continued to move back from the hands, that we can have that double shot and just edge our bets on which side the hands were going to fall on. So sometimes you'd hit here and then score here. Sometimes you'd get both scores, but it was maintaining pressure. So that's what you're kind of looking at with that one. So what about...
And then I guess you have the option of going to the head with that as well, Adrian, and that's actually something that you see a lot in MMA in particular, of going to the body with one and then switching to the head with the opposite side. And it's a nice shot if you can get it. Again, it's an interesting one, because as we just chatted through there of keeping the hips square for the 45, for this one to get it off, you need to get more of a hip twist, and you need to switch from side to side. And I think that's where a lot of people almost struggle with this, is they try to carry it and keep the hips square, and it's kind of difficult to do. So you need to be able to switch the hips as you bring them up. So once you go from one, you have to switch the body direction. So you're going from facing this side to facing this side. And that's one of the kind of the most important parts of the double dalio. As you said, you're looking, realistically in ITF, you're looking to get that off once you're in contact with hands.
Yeah, and then we have again, the clinch kind of thing. Those, like, the ITF didn't deal with anything productive in the clinch initially. Like, clinch was somewhere where you end up and you tried to keep punching, was pretty much the way that it worked. And the WC, because they weren't allowed to punch, and there was no head punching going on, it meant they were finding creative solutions for what to do when you're too close, when you are in the clinch. And they're finding shots like that out to in crescent kick. They're finding ways of getting the leg to come over. And they're making space for these short turning kicks. like you'd see, I suppose that this shot never came over to ITF, and I don't know that it did score, but you'd sometimes see that, you know, you get into the clinch and you'd have something just using the side of the foot trying to make a connection. Now that wouldn't have scored years ago in WT either, but it was just something to try and make a space. But if you're, you know, quite close, it's very easy to make a slight angle to get that turning kick in. So as you're shooting your hip back, you're able to make a contact with the foot from really very close. This is too close to punch, but I can get that contact by just shifting that little bit.
A little hop.
A little hop, yeah. It's just bringing the body upright and shortening it. So I'm actually keeping my head in very close range and letting the hip sink back, you know, so that from that position, we can be back in again quite quickly. And that works well from static positions. It doesn't work so well when people are moving.
Yeah.
But, you know, where it came in, a little more flow was allowed. So nowadays you might well have that if a trade starts, the referee is going to step in and avoid, you know, break the match up. But, you know, contact was let go a little bit more back in the late 80s and early 90s. So while the punches could be swinging, it was perfectly possible to throw a kick and get in there. But momentum kind of dictates that, you know. But that was, again, a shot that was sometimes borrowed and sometimes introduced that I think definitely had its origins in the WT side of things.
That little pop step as well is very important no matter what way you're going to hands, I think, because even in the modern day blitz, once you bring that space very, very close, it's then important to be able to get that step as well. So once you close in the distance here and you go 1-2, it's very hard now to get that shot off. So it's sometimes you need that little step as well, or whether you're going on the opposite leg, it's here. And that just little slide opens up the space a little bit as well. And that's what you're looking for a lot of the time, to be able to get your shots off with the hands and then adjust that distance as quick as you can. And why? Because you don't want the referee to step in. If you're looking to be the one that kind of continues the action, to go to like mid-range, or else you need to come back out of range completely. And by doing that with an exit shot, which is something that we've spoken about a lot, it allows you to get the option to be the one to finish the shot with the last shot in the exchange.
While we're still on those ones, do you want to talk about the 360, which is definitely the highlight reel shot?
Yeah, so on the 360, obviously it's not something that we see a lot in ITF, but it is a lovely, lovely shot if you can get it off. Let's just talk first of some of the common mistakes. So I like to use this off my front leg. So what I do when I teach this to my own students is I say, you make almost like a banded dolly chaggy, like a miniature one, the smallest one you can imagine, around your front leg. And then by making that, your hips are turned in this direction. And now what you got to do is make a jump to switch your hips in this direction. So it's kind of like what I spoke about earlier with the hips. So if you can make a mini band kind of around that leg, keeping the leg as low to the ground as you can, that's the key. Your hips are now facing this way, and then with the little jump, you're using that to turn your hips. And that's the key for the 360. And of course, it's a lovely entry shot. And if you can do that nice and try to stay relatively close to the ground, the higher you come up, the more time you spend in the air, the longer it takes to get there. And there's more opportunity that your partner might just step in and take you clean out. So you want to stay relatively low to the ground as you spin through. And the key to it is that turn of the hips. Making that mini banded dolly, hips are now facing this direction. You got to jump to create the hip switch to get it off in the other way.
Boom. And I think for me, that's one of the things that actually lets you talk about the fact we kind of borrowed some stepping ideas from WT as well. And that's one where if you take the same exact shot, but you just take a step before you throw, and that's often like just something that you do with beginners just to introduce it. You stop it in the middle of the step. But that step can also be a test to come back at whatever happens to come next, you know, because you can split it up. But ITF tended to have, you know, the follow, you know, or lead in with the front leg. But everything was kept for the most part, whatever your dominant leg was, stayed there, with the exception of maybe taking a back leg downward kick or something. So it tended to be a front leg fencer's game going back to the early 80s and so on. So the change when you introduce stepping, of course, changes what leg you have in front. So whether I have a step this way, a step this way, stepping behind, you know, angle steps, things like this. This all became necessary, I think, in WT as well, because that front leg, that wasn't scoring. So you needed to find a way to change the distance in a right arm to where you could make a shot with an impact. And of course, to avoid that kick, people were making a bigger step back. They're bringing their back into play. So, you know, you're throwing that back leg shot. I'm stepping here and waiting for my opportunity to counter. It brought in some stepping. And what did that do for ITF? Well, you then could play from different ranges. So instead of sparring at this range the whole time, we could shorten or change the ranges and use that differently with the legs. So I could come back to this longer range and have a step in for the back kick for the exit. We could have the angle to get to hands. So here to break the line and come to hands. And it allowed a different play because in the WT, you couldn't come to hands. But because we were working with different ranges, because of the hands and the legs, that stepping became a bit interesting. And the 360 is a perfect example of that, where traditionally, you might have had your reverse turning kick, but now you had the option to throw a shot that you could easily vary the length on. So I could throw the 360 from here and make that hit, or I could come all the way back to here and make the same shot hit. I could change the length on it massively with that step and disguise it, because you don't know, is it going to be a back kick or a band-aid as easily from the beginning. Lovely pressure shot on the edge of the ring as well. So I think,
yeah, and I think based on that as well, what you just said is, remember, Adrian, we did a fight chat Friday on the axe kick, and we noticed that the back leg axe kick was something that was rarely countered. And I feel like the 360 is almost like that as well, in a way, that when people see spinning, they almost like just back up, because one of the reasons for that is because we don't see it so often. And the second of all, you see somebody spinning, you just say, okay, let's just bail out of this. And you almost have to be comfortable of where it comes from to almost chunk the information to say, okay, it's safe to go right through that. And it's one of the best options, is to just go straight through that spin. But what that allows then is, if you can almost set that up, like you said, from the longer range, and we might see this of like the 360 drop down with steps, and it sets up the banded dolly then as well. So it's kind of like that continuation of the two shots together, and they naturally flow quite well. And it's usually a shot that you'll see people almost finish in matches with, as kind of like a big hurrah or whatever, or something like that as well. So as you said, it's nice to be able to link up those shots with the steps.
So we've got some great comments coming in from Tomatito 1981. So a great name, and B, some very interesting comments. So was just talking about the different shots that he feels, he or she, actually, I don't know which, so apologies, but the faster way of performing the turning kick, which was similar to Shotokan with a knee straight and then a quick turn at the end. Totally agree with the 45, as we call it, and I know it's had that name in WT as well. We are definitely going to come to the back kick and the spinning hook kick, because those are definitely two shots that were definitely thrown differently in ITF prior to, you know, migrating some of the training concepts from WT. And he's talking as well about the footwork, like we were, that the stepping and the footwork in WT was and is better than in the ITF style. And again, rather than a better, I suppose what I would say is they meet the needs and demands of the sport. And in WT, you need to have a different style of stepping, and it's because the trading is all with the legs, I think. And I think once you introduce the hands, we have this kind of a change where now in the ITF, it's more about a linear explosiveness now than it used to be. You know, at different times, there was a lot more circular motion. I think now that linear explosiveness is so important. You need to be able to move with the front leg so fast, you know, to be able to pin a person, to be able to cut off the ring and so on. But there is absolutely enormous quality amongst the competitors and fighters in WT. And there's still things that we can learn, and we've already looked at a couple of videos on that, but we'll definitely go ahead and just talk through a couple of those other techniques that Tom Tito was talking about there as well. So maybe we look at the counters with the turning kick. So I kind of we flagged a couple of those where the turning kick as a counter wasn't really a feature in ITF, not in the way that it has become over the years.
And they're talking about the long one off of side kick, for example.
Yeah,
things like
exactly.
That.
Yeah. And again, the cheeky one under the leg, so attacking under the high leg, I think, as well.
Yeah, so you got two options on this, and you can actually bring it off the front leg with like a foot-to-foot step. So if somebody's shooting high with their own side kick, a lot of times you see people come under like this, with a nice checked kind of guard, and that's something that really comes from the WT style. Is their guard is all about just closing off any available space. So you can see that sometimes coming off that side. If you have the correct lower close stance. So it's like if I have my left, they have their left in front. If I have my right, they have their right. So then you can kind of almost come under that slightly if it's a high section technique. So if they're like shooting a side kick towards my shoulder level, then it opens the area underneath that kick. So what goes high, there's space under. What goes middle section, there's usually space to go over. And it's the same principle here. So if you go directly under, you probably need to get a step. So from here, you're probably going to just like a nice cheeky little step underneath. If nothing, it might just disrupt their advancement in ITF, because they're usually trying to get a bit of a push on you, get some momentum, and get the hands when they're shooting like that. Then when you flip the script on that and you switch the stance, so then imagine my opponent has their stomach facing the same direction as me. So we both have our stomach facing this. Then you'll be looking to come off on the back leg more so towards, I'm just waiting for our camera to come back to us. Yeah, so they're shooting towards the shoulder level again, and you want to come underneath that off the back leg. And just like I was talking about, the turn of the hips here is vital. My hips are now facing this direction. You need to switch them in the opposite direction. So a lot of time people will do this, and their standing foot will get them caught, and you won't get hit. You get nailed with the side kick as it attacks you. So you need to switch the hips to come underneath, and that takes your attacking hip, which is here, away. So that just comes to the back, and now the target, which is all of this area here, is removed as I also lean. So you want to be coming under with that shot. So it's here, one, and you just lean the body back with that. So it's a switch of the hips, which is key to that shot.
Yeah, and definitely I think that that style of counter kicking was not common. With the turning kick was not common prior to the introduction of some of these techniques and concepts from WT. We've a comment in there from Georgios as well about the running kick, and we'll definitely have a quick look at that now before I jump into the axe kick. But the idea of the running kick was there's a lot that can build off of it, but we don't see that now, definitely in ITF. But it did come into a degree where you're ending up using the front leg as you come in this way. But the idea being that you're not going to touch the floor as you step across, but you're making that quick stepping motion to cover big distance as you get in. And it can be a thing of like, if you have your partner or your opponent escaping, it's still a shot that you can use, but we would tend to coach against a preparatory step that moves this way, just because the distance is usually such that it's easy enough to cut the person off before they move. But if the distance is long, if the person is spending too much of their time retreating, so they're moving a little too fast or a little out of control, that can be a nice one to just pin them. And even almost with the running front kick, as weird as it looks, it can be a shot that just pins the person, because you can cover distance really, really quickly. And that's definitely something that was very, very common. And, obviously in WT, you can just start with that and continue. But for us, that tends to work out as a single shot that brings you into hands and then reversing to make an exit. The downward kick is something, or the axe kick, or, there's different names that we put in it. But the feature was definitely that the most common version of the downward kick that we had in ITF tended to come off of something of the front leg and then came on a kind of an inside to outside fashion this way, and was generally looking to come across the shoulder of a retreating opponent, or to force them into kind of a retreating step, and then that was your entrance into hands or whatever was going to come later. What came with the WT was two things. First, to some degree, the front leg one, but the main thing was just the directness. So instead of throwing the downward kick, this way with a straight leg, it became a knee to shoulder direct chop kick with the toes extended, the foot pointed, trying to get as much reach with the toes as you possibly could, and also the possibility of going directly up close to the body before extending. But it meant you could go directly floor to face very, very quickly and very directly, and you're covered through the middle, because if someone is to step into you at any point in the middle, you have a foot between you and your opponent.
Nice.
So that then becomes kind of an interesting shot. Now, that's one that's kind of gone in, come out, gone in, come out. And I still don't see many people throwing that. But it's always been, as far as the downward kick goes, my go-to or my preferred shot if I'm going to try and throw it. I want to keep that as short as possible and just put it there. And again, you can adjust your body. So I can be very close and put it there, but I can also adjust my body and get some reach and be far away. And it's a nice little shot that way. And you often find people with limited kicking ability can still manage that reasonably well, just because, you can threaten the face relatively simply. It's not too hard to do it. And then, of course, what we'd be very used to now with that front leg, where we're carrying from here, and then we're going to take the shot up and diagonally across the hacks. That's an ITF variation, I think, on the straighter shot that would have come from WT in the 90s. But again, that's one of my favorites.
It is a nice shot. Yeah, if you can get that going off the back leg, as we said earlier, it's very hard and it's very rare that you see someone almost commit to countering that, and they most likely will just move backwards themselves and retreat.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little bit of agreement on that one from Georgios, the downward kick. But it is very, very, very different with the as the guys are pointing out here, where the hands coming into the game do change everything. But what you have between the two is little bits of technique that you can see, where now some of the checking movements, the front leg blocking movements, and the side push and thrust kicks sneak over into WT now that they're effective and that they're scoring. The front leg high hook kick in particular, things like that as well. Whereas coming our way is stuff to do with the legs from different ranges, steps that bring kicks into range and out of range, counter kicks in particular. Those are things that we've definitely become inspired by what we're seeing in WT and bring those back over.
Yeah, I do like as well the idea there that we've kind of touched on a few times today of having kicks short and long with the same technique. I think that's a good thing to have in your toolkit, to be able to do that, because it just gives you that extra bit of unpredictability in terms of your opponent trying to read the shot. Is it going to be coming short? Is it going to be coming long? And what is actually going to be coming? So that's a very important thing, that if you can, it's like the back kick as well. We spoke about the back kick of the higher you get the backside and the heel to the backside, the closer you can be and still get that off. And you can still make it a long kick if you want to. So the more versatility you have in the one kick, I think it's a massive tool to have as well. Even if your kicks are relatively limited, maybe you've only 2 or 3 techniques in your back pocket that are really your go-to shots, but then being able to draw the variations of that, because we know that there's not 2 techniques are the same. It's getting the varied kind of the varied distance and the ways you can use it in different timing and stuff like that is a very, very important thing as well.
Yeah, so speaking of that, I think let's have a look at a couple of those. So, Richie, do you want to maybe take the back kick and I'll take the reverse hook kick, and we'll play with those. But just looking at the distance, like maybe a traditional ITF backside kick. Sorry, I'm showing the wrong one. Traditional ITF backside kick versus an exit back kick or retreating back kick versus the going vertical for that close distance.
Yeah. So first off, you have like the circular one, like Adrian was saying, the more traditional one. So usually, like we've seen the kind of the running or the foot-to-foot turning kick there is a nice option on that one. You can almost use your front hand there as well and just come around to that open space. So usually if something is kind of coming on this line of my body, I can kind of come around that in a circular fashion and maybe open up that space in there right into the center. So it's more of that turning one. One of the common mistakes that people make is they actually try to counter a side kick with this. This can only work with a high section side kick. So it's kind of like the one we spoke about earlier. If it's coming up towards the shoulder, then you can kind of use that space to come into it with your almost carry the kick on your back or that at the head. But when you try counter it to the body, it's not a good idea. If there's a side kick here and you're trying to wind up, all you're doing is actually making that target bigger. So the target now is quite slim. And then as you turn, you're making that target bigger because it's now towards your back. And chances are they're going to hit you in the back and you're going to fall over. So it's not the best idea to use that for to counter a middle side kick. It's more to go with the high section one. So if you're going to do your traditional ITF one of circling, you're going to probably have two you can use that. you're going to be either doing it against a turning kick on this side. So, for example, the running kick and things like that, you can come around them, or a high section side kick off the front leg. And then we have the option of the kind of the tidier, more direct back kick, like a donkey kick, some people call it, and it's very, very short. So it's more like this one here. And I think that's one of the ones that actually came from trying to exit that close range. A lot of time when they got into that close range, people were able to find that as a lovely little exit. And then the whole idea of the switch of the feet as well, which is massive. So being able to switch your feet or bringing your front leg back beyond here is very, very important. And then being able to do that as you get off your back kick is key. So what you're looking to do there, and what we spoke about in terms of the distance, is your heel. So if you can come over your shoulder here and have the heel close to your backside and the knees down, then you have more options. So let me show you what I mean. If I'm shooting my back kick here and my heel is close, then I can shoot that at a very close distance. I'll show you from the other side. If I'm here, I can get that off if my heel is high to my backside. If my heel is low, then the only option I have is to get it in more of a straighter line and a longer shot. So the further away that your heel is from your own body, the less distance you can get that kick off with. And it is a nice option to be able to shoot that from the very close range with a switch step as well. So if you can get that off at a very close range there, it's a nice little one to have in your pocket as an exit back kick.
Cool. So there's a few things in terms of, like, I think ITF and WT had kind of a similar evolution in terms of some of the jump kicks. So in particular, we'll just stay with the back kick for a second, but I'm also going to go to the reverse hook kick. But there was an element where in ITF initially, that jump back side kick tended to be, a full open high kind of shot. And the WT version was equally, and still is to some degree, because the attack is with the legs and it's not necessarily something like a blitz at full stretch. It can be better almost to hold your ground a little bit and get up for that clearer score, catch the person on the chest, or even under the chin, and basically put that break in the fight. But the ITF adapted version of that was very much either the exit or the retreat, as Richie had there, where very much just looking to sneak it onto the hip and doing it while retreating to gain a bit of space against those oncoming hands where, the distance was getting closed very quickly. And like you said, with the heel as tight as possible, the principles are exactly the same, but the height that it took place on is a bit different. And then we go to the reverse turning kick versus reverse hook kick. And for me, again, until I was, I'd say, nearly 20, I'd never seen a reverse hook kick thrown in a sparring competition, really. The first time, actually, that I can say I genuinely saw it was when I threw a downward kick and got one in the jaw from Ivan Clement. So, like, again, memorable. But the deal was, like, the reverse turning kick tended to be bum, bum, bum. And it was the follow-on to dropping your front leg if the person gave you enough space and you couldn't go directly to hands. So that was when that came in. Or if you had something coming in off the front leg like that, and you just stand tall, body up, and send the heel right through the ear. And that was where the reverse turning kick was. And then the distances started to close faster, and maybe we wanted to just reach and have this kind of score where, a much quicker shot, and we might finish at 180, reaching with the ball or with the flat of the foot. And then we could also adjust our distance. So you could have it with a switch, but you could also adjust the distance without stepping, simply by dropping the head. And, coming in this fashion, when we go over, became an option. So you could start where your opponent was that little bit further away as they begin their shot, but because I'm dropping my body, I was shortening my own distance and letting them come onto it. And again, that was something where there was no shot in ITF that I would have known growing up that was thrown conceding the body. Like, if we threw a turning kick, it was here. If we threw a side kick, it was here. The goal was to keep the body tall, and then you connected with hands once the legs got through. Or you had one and you came back in with the hands. It was that kind of connection. So the idea of conceding the body position to get the kick was just alien. So there was definitely a few shots like that, like the spinning hook kick, that because the body position was, conceded, you were not going to recover out of that into a good punching position. It was unusual for us as fighters. And it's the same with the switch to some degree. The idea of conceding ground initially for us just meant you got your timing wrong. Like you should have been able to see them coming and catch them and be faster than them. And then eventually you just realize, no, I'm not giving my opponent enough credit. They're allowed to be fast. They're allowed to be clever. They're allowed to have good ideas of their own. So I might need just to concede that bit of ground and let the shot open up. And, I think that was definitely something that came, or that we ported over with a little bit of training and sneaking in those efficiencies into the kicks. That's kind of the way I would put it.
Yeah, and it's not something that we planned before the session, Adrian, but the amount of kicks that we can see that being used in close range and long range is very interesting. I think that's something that I'm going to take away from this session. Actually, it's not something that you think of, but it's very, very important being able to throw them at close range and at that further range out as well.
Yeah, I think we're getting some great comments. I suspect that these guys have more of a WT background, which is great because really, really nice to have these guys in here. Between Georgios, maybe we adapted the footwork for evading and counter-attacking instead of blocking. And blocking is common it's really common in WT. I'm not sure which way around that is. I do think blocking and stepping into the techniques is very, very common in WT, and it also now is common in ITF. Maybe it wasn't initially, where in ITF it would have been more common, I suppose, to just give ground and move and then come back in again with your own front leg. And then
I think that the point of that as well is that we have hands in play in that close range, so people are more willing to get to that closer range compared to WT.
Yeah, that is true too. You're just looking for a different solution from that position. And WT need to land with the body balanced to be able to allow combination kicking, because we can go off balance because the hands will save you. To some degree. Whereas with WT, you've got to keep in balance to be able to combine the kicks and get to the next kick. If you're off balance, the next kick isn't coming as easily, or you get used to throwing the kicks from off balance positions. So here, the back kicks with knee down for close range and close guard and still landing in a counter position. Yeah, absolutely. But again, it's also protecting you, isn't it? Like that back kick with the low knee. I'll just flip over to my camera for a second. One of the key things that we're learning on that one is, well, if someone is throwing a turning kick at the same time as you start that, well, at least your precious cargo is being guarded by your thigh.
Yeah.
So, you have a little bit of protection there as well. And it's also the thing that if I let the knee spin wide, now there's a gap for a person to come through to hands. So there's a space here, and we don't want that. We want to get rid of the space and make it so that it's all threat, so that any direct forward movement. And anytime you make your opponent have to find an angle or an inefficient way to go through to you, I think that's going to be, more sound in terms of your strategy.
Not to mention your recovery on that as well. That when you hit that back kick, as you go here, you have the option of the recovery here. So now you're ready to go again. And whether you want to be side facing, full facing, depending on the range you're at, it does give you a better option in terms of the recovery, I think.
So again, I would just take this moment as well before we add anything else, just to say, look, if there's any questions that people have in conclusion, by all means, throw them in there to us, and we'll deal with them over the next 4 or 5 minutes. And again, a reminder that next Tuesday is our last session. We're doing a little bit of a live Q&A as well as taking some pre-planned topics. So if anyone has anything they want us to deal with in our last session next Tuesday, definitely hit us up on any of the social media channels. We'll gather that together and bring it into a session, or bring your notepad and pen and write down a few questions for us as the session goes on, and hit us up with a few questions. Anything as well with a practical demo or practical explanation would be great for next week. So Richie, is there any other topics you wanted to grind on before we finish out this session today?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of things there today, really, haven't we? We've looked at some entries, we looked at some shots in contact, looked at a few exit shots like the back kick and things like that, and even a couple of things then like stepping and leaning the body and things like that as well. So I think we've actually covered a lot, and there's a lot of stuff there that you wouldn't see in modern day ITF, but it will be, it is a possibility, I guess, and it's something that gives a little bit of scope to get a little bit more creative for people if they're willing to put a bit of work into it and find ways to work around and come up with creativity to find these shots a little bit more, and hopefully people are getting back to more live training, which will allow them to find a little bit of creativity in their training going forward. I'm assuming that there's not many people at the moment who have the luxury of being able to work around with a live partner. So that will be great when that does happen.
Really looking forward to that part. All right, for sure. Yeah, and I mean, this kind of topic is definitely for me inspired by people that I would have worked with over the years, going back to Master or Grandmaster Boss, Henk Meyer from the Netherlands, some of the guys from there. And even in Ireland, Johnny Hayden and a couple of guys from WT, where we did a good bit of crossover training. That would have been early 2000s, would have been a bit later. Luke Woods, of course, adapted a lot of that into his style. You know, it was just a time of, right, okay, let's see who's near us, who's doing well, what can we learn from them? And you try everything, and you find what works, and you discard what doesn't. And then sometimes you find where you tried something, you practiced it for a year or two, it didn't work then, but 5 or 6 years later it does, because the game changed. So it's good to have these things in the back pocket.
It always goes in cycles, doesn't it? What works maybe like in the 80s will come back around again. What worked in the 90s will come back around, and all these things will come back around eventually. So it's good to understand how they work and the principles behind them. They're the things that will stand the test of time.
So a question there, wouldn't it be more effective to throw the back kick more like a side kick, and I presume the turning side kick, but strike in the midline instead of throwing it fully knee down and leaving that side unguarded? So it's an interesting question, and I suppose the big thing is it depends on where you feel the threat is going to be. And the biggest issue in terms of the turning side piercing kick, you're throwing the back kick more like a side kick, is the range. It's, you know, it's the range that it can happen on, and so
it's more going to attacking then, really, isn't it, Adrian?
If you've developed the range, then the back kick is a little bit different once you extend over range. You can definitely get away with a turning side kick once the range develops. You can even do it with a 360 if you ask Dotsy about it, because he managed that. But the concept is definitely that if I'm turning to you with more of the turning side kick, even if I'm nailing it down the middle, there is a longer turn to it. So there's a little more time for my opponent to perceive this turning action happening. And as long as he's moving to this side, or he's moving this way as he comes forward, there is plenty of space for him to get around my rotating body. The idea, I suppose, of the back kick being that even if I'm doing it with my front leg in place, so I'll leave it there, with my front leg in place, it's very tight and there's nothing much of a scoring target available to me. So it's denial as well. I've removed everything. My head's far away, my body is turned, my elbows are by my sides as such, and I'm reaching out towards my opponent's body. There's not much of a scoring target anywhere to be found. Whereas once my leg comes to this position, maybe he can come under the leg, but everything on this side is open. My face is here, it's available. The body is here, it's available. There's just more of a scoring target available. It's never a case of you can't use the other one, but the situations where they develop are different. For example, where we like it a lot, or myself certainly, I like this as an exit. So not so much as a counter, but we've got the hands here, and I have my exit. Whereas to do that with a turning side kick, I need to get much further back, and I can't do that from hands, because I need to break the distance first and set my feet, or just wind up a little bit more in order to create that range. Whereas I can throw it directly from here and squeeze it in rhythm with the hands, and I think that's where we like it as an exit.
And I think as well, if you're talking about this as a counter attack, like chances are if you're countering it, your opponent is coming into range and you're trying to counter it. So this kick actually brings you into their range. So you almost like pass them out a little bit. So it will almost come like this, with that type of side kick. So if you use the bag here that I'm using as like a marker of where I am, if I do this type of side kick, look where I am now. I've gone forwards, actually past this bag here. Once my camera,
I think it actually throws in a good place to illustrate that. Yeah.
So you actually come forward a lot more because your hips have to square up, and then it kind of goes hand in hand what Adrian said of giving somebody an out to the side. It's because as you're both coming in together as well, chances are you might even pass them out with your counter attack. So that's why as an attack, as a direct attack if your opponent is stationary and don't have many options to retreat. It might be a nice one. But in terms of a counter, the situation needs to be a lot more specific, I think. Whereas the other option with the knee down, I think you can kind of have a bit more leeway with it, really.
Cool. Yeah, and again, I think that brings us to the end of the topics that we wanted to cover tonight. And again, huge thank you to everybody who interacted. It really does make the session a whole lot more enjoyable for ourselves when people are throwing out their thoughts, comments, suggestions, and questions. It's massive. So thanks for being so active in the chat. Richie, is there anything we're meant to tell people about before we sign off for today?
Nothing special. We have a couple of things in the pipeline, so we'll talk about those soon. But make sure for our last one, get involved next Tuesday, same time, same place. We'll put the option out there to get your questions in, so we'll put it on various social media platforms to take in some questions. And of course, we'll take some live questions as well next week. But if you have any suggestions of a broad topic that we can cover for our last one, definitely get involved there. Let us know in the chat. If you are new to the channel, down in, let me get this side right, wrong side. Down this side, no, I was right the first time. Down the corner on the bottom right, I'm all over the place with my sides here. Cameras are reversed, but down on the bottom right, you'll see a subscribe button. Click on that. There'll be a pop-up. You can subscribe nice and easily there. If you're new to the channel, always, as we said in the previous one, make sure and get in touch with us if you have suggestions. Hit the video a thumbs up, and we will see you on Friday. Fight Chat Friday, we'll be live again. We'll have more of a sit-down analysis type of one as opposed to a practical one. So hopefully we'll see some people then. If not, have a good week, and hopefully we'll see you next Tuesday.
All right, next time.